10-minute recess be appropriate?
Can I take it, please?
Yeah.
Please, are we good?
5-minute recess?
5 minutes. Thanks,
fine.
Brandon. We're good? Yeah, okay. Look, I know. Ooh, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. To item H4, Local Control Accountability Plan, LCAP.
They didn't need to make a motion on the last item, did they?
No. So, President Dice and members of the board, what I'd like to do in terms of presenting this item is just to recap what has happened since our Friday night study session. So based on the board's comments, so if you recall last Friday's study session, the board gave direction to staff to build into the LCAP plan, I think it was 4 items that were the highest priority ranking items by board average score. We have done that, and as a result, we have taken a couple of things out of Section 2 that were in your previous draft, because the directions from the county is only include in Sections 2 and 3 those items that you're going to fund. So we had to make some revisions to Section 2, which then caused us to make some revisions to Section 3, because the things in Section 2 really should show up in Section 3 as well, in the appropriate section, whether it's 3A or in Section 3B. So we kind of had to go through and look at that and make those revisions. We also got some feedback from Member Dwin and Member Affelt regarding some technical and some other suggestions that would make the LCAP plan more strongly aligned to what the statute requires. So we've made every effort to do that. But perhaps, and so we believe we've incorporated most of Member Dwin and Member Affelt's comments into the hard copy version you have tonight. So I want to point out that the hard copy version you have tonight is the most updated draft, and it's been updated since the one that was sent to you Monday night at 9 o'clock. Okay? So rather than go through every change in Section 2 and Section 3, what I'd like to do is to refer to this colored matrix sheet and use this as the basis to kind of explain what I think are the most significant changes to the hard copy draft that you have in front of you tonight. And then, of course, you have not previously seen Section 3C and 3D, which we really couldn't complete until the board went through the exercise on Friday evening. So we'll certainly take comments or address any questions the board may have regarding what is in Section 3C and 3D. But if you recall, so what I'd like to do is go through this first. I mean, if you do have questions about what is actually specifically in Section 2 and 3, we'll be prepared to respond to those. But we think the most critical piece is this. As you recall, on last Friday evening, I mentioned to the board that the actual dollars available to the board are probably really not going to be known until 2 things happen. One is that the district closes the books on the 13-14 year, which typically occurs sometime in late August. And secondly, following, well, probably over 90% of the school districts who attend school services annual budget workshop. This is the workshop that's in most years tries to be scheduled in July, but it ultimately depends on when the governor signs the budget. In the last 10 years, more often than not, the state has not made the July 1st statutory deadline. But in any case, school services, within a few weeks after the governor signs the budget, presents workshops around the state attended by probably 90% of CBOs and school superintendents and in some cases other staff to get direction on how to actually calculate revenues for the subsequent year based on their analysis and interpretation of the governor's budget. As an aside, it is often said that people in the Department of Finance and the State Department often attend SSC's workshops so that they can understand how school districts calculate their revenue. So we do anticipate that following, at least Mr. Bonet and Dr. Rubio will be going to the July School Services Workshop in Sacramento, that they will come back and then we'll be able to revise the budget that we're asking you to adopt this evening, to revise that budget to reflect the new calculations, and we are hopeful that those new calculations will identify some additional source of money. All of this to say that, as was mentioned Friday evening, that sometime in early September, it would probably be good for the board to meet again and to look at the dollars, if there are new dollars available, to look at those new dollars relative to what other things on your priority list could be funded, or whether, depending on how the new dollars are coming to you, whether or not you can use those dollars to offset or begin to work on reducing the ongoing structural deficit. So it kind of depends on where the dollars come, because if they come in supplemental concentration grants, you got to spend it for the purpose. Is that right, Member Afrell? Right. You have to spend it for the purposes for which the dollars come to you. But if there are other sources of revenue that come that have greater flexibility, then the board certainly has an option to not spend those monies on these on any new priorities, and look at that as a way of beginning to reduce the deficit spending in the district. But what I also mentioned to you is that it would be a good exercise for the board and the staff to begin to look at how the base grant monies are being spent in the district, so that the board has the opportunity to look at any changes the board wants to make in terms of how those dollars are spent, and which could either free up additional dollars to fund LCAP priorities, or also could be used as ways to work on reducing the structural deficit spending for 15-16. So in either case, yeah, I think it would be a valuable exercise for the board to go through. So essentially what we're saying is, without getting into the details of accounting, for the board to basically know where all the dollars are being spent. So with that being said, including parcel tax, absolutely. And in some ways that's a little easier for us to document, because we have to provide that report to the Parcel Tax Oversight Committee annually. And they will meet in October, November, to look at how the dollars were spent in the prior year. So to go down this list then, so one of the major activities we've been involved in today is Wednesday, the last 2 days, is to re-examine some parts of our general fund budget to see if there are additional dollars available that are unallocated, untapped, not yet identified for expenditure, that we can use to fund some of the priorities that the board had already approved. So I want to go through the green section first, and because the 4 items in the green section are items that the board authorized to use supplemental and concentrated grant money to fund, and what we have found in 2 cases, that there are other sources of funds that could be utilized instead of the supplemental concentration grant monies, which could then be placed somewhere else. So the first item is the full-time science teacher continues to be funded by the supplemental concentration grant at 103,727. That's not changed. Similarly, the transfer 20% of each of the special ed teachers or the educational specialists so that they can access and work with targeted general education students, in which in most cases will be low-income students, if not all cases, that the board approved, and that continues to be funded through supplemental and concentration grant money. However, the next item, supplemental reading materials for intervention, acceleration, English learners, and students with special needs. While originally on Friday we had identified that as to be funded through supplemental and concentration grant monies, there are some parcel tax monies from the 2011-12 year, 2011-12, Mr. Bonet, not 12-13, 11-12, is it? Okay.
Are you speaking of the 171?
Yes. Was that from 12-13?
That would be from 13-14.
Okay. So there are
I apologize.
the year prior to that.
Well, that's how far back that.
Right. So there's and some of those dollars that were unexpended parcel tax was used last year to upgrade and replace technology that needed to be replaced because the parcel tax authorized expenditures for technology, and so some of that funds were used for that. But there's basically $171,000 left in that fund. So we're recommending that we use about 4,100 of those dollars for this purpose, which is authorized by the parcel tax measure. And the board is aware that the district annually gets lottery money, of which about 20% of it is restricted lottery funds. They have to be used to fund in the classroom, use the funds to provide materials for the classroom. Our general fund budget estimates about a little over $20,000 in the restricted side of the lottery funds for next year. We're proposing to use 10,820 of that, so that we're proposing that that item be funded at the amount which the board approved, $15,000, but did not be funded through supplemental and concentration grant funds. The next item, professional development for the Common Core. We Friday night identified that as to be funded from the supplemental and concentration grant funds. We also are recommending that that be spent from the $171,000 carryover from the parcel tax. What is the reason for those two items being proposed to be funded from the one-time parcel tax money? Because those are one-time expenditures for the next year. So essentially, we've moved $65,000 out of the $241,000 to not be spent from the supplemental and concentration grant funds. So therefore, if you move to the blue area, and you can see that these items are ordered in the average priority rank score that the board established on Friday evening, there are 5 items that received a score of 1.6, and we are suggesting that the first item, hourly pay for staff for after-school tutoring, be then paid from the supplemental and concentration grant. We're then recommending that the part-time ELL teacher at ESS also be funded from the supplemental and concentration grant at an estimated cost of $41,491, with the caveat that it could be less than that. But remember, that cost was based upon hiring a 40% person at the highest place in which that individual can come in on the salary schedule based on years of service and units, graduate units. The next item, math curriculum alignment to the CCS. This is the item that in which Dr. Rubio, in survey with teachers in the district, there was strong interest to immediately begin to pilot math curriculum materials that are aligned to the Common Core. We are suggesting again that instead of using the supplemental concentration grant, which was the only source we identified as of Friday evening, that we use one-time carryover money from the parcel tax of $20,000 and the balance of the restricted lottery dollars of about $10,000 to fund that $30,000 estimated cost. We then are recommending that the student information data assessment system be funded at $10,000 out of the supplemental concentration grant. Noted earlier that Mr. Gibb had indicated that the site council felt strongly about teachers and the staff being able to access and use data in order to inform instruction in the classroom. And it's easier to do that if you have a student information data system in place. And then lastly, we looked at the base grant. Now, if you recall, the projected increase to the base grant is about 85,000, and Mr. Bonet was indicating that until we really know what the district's liability is for the increased STIRS contribution and the fact that we also have to cover step and column increases, there's really virtually not a lot of money there, but we're carving out $5,000 to be used as a stipend for an existing staff person at the secondary school to coordinate the opportunity for students to participate in work experience and or internships. If we go to the next page, a couple other items. So all the items in blue are the ones that we're recommending that we actually implement for next year. So 2.0, provide stipend to staff for data analysis and evaluation. So there's, as you see, there's no dollar cost for that. And part of the reason for that is, at least at Annie Yates, they do have early release Thursdays. And the early release Thursdays are used for a variety of purposes, including professional development time, the grade levels working together. But I can tell you, in the state of Hawaii, all the elementary schools also have early release time. They are, by state mandate, required to have school site data teams. So, and I visited 40 schools. They all have data teams, usually organized by grade levels, and many of them use the early release day once a week for the grade levels to meet to look at data. And, you know, you're not looking at data every week necessarily, because it depends on when you give either local or state assessments. But we think that activity should continue, but we don't think, at least at this point, there's a dollar cost to that. It's more a scheduling issue. And then the last item there in blue is the full-time technology teacher. And you see the cost estimate. We're suggesting that instead of looking to the supplemental and concentration grant funds, which we don't have sufficient money for, that we look at using base grant and look at the possibility of an existing staff person who actually might be reassigned to teach the technology. So quickly, if you go back to the first page, if you look at the items in the green box and the 5 items in the blue box, that just somewhat coincidentally, I guess, adds up to $241,280. So we believe that everything with a rank of 1.2 through and including all the items ranked at 1.6 can be funded. We think, however, the activities on page 2 in blue, the activities in blue can be implemented. And I'll come down to the one down near the bottom on PE. And just make a few comments about that. The items in red are the items that still are not funded because we have not yet been able to identify a potential funding source for those. And then the 2 items in yellow, the bilingual parent liaison and the training and second step positive action and the peacemaker curriculum for new staff, maybe 2 items that are possible within the Annie Yates site plan, because the site, as I understand it, the site council has committed $40,000 to fund 2 other full-time positions that the district isn't able to afford to pay for the balance of those. But the site council could certainly fund the bilingual parent liaison, and possibly, depending on how much time the liaison is hired for and what the cost is, could fund those 2 items. I think the training and second step positive action, I think, was estimated at $5,000. So it's possible that if the board approved a site council plan that included Title I funding for one or both of those positions, that those things can be implemented for next year. I just want to say a couple things about the PE teacher. So I think I will have to say staff takes seriously the issue of whether the district is in compliance with the Ed Code requirement for the number of minutes of PE at grades 1 through 8. And it is true with the current level of, with the 1IA that we're not able to meet those minute requirements. But, and I know Ms. Eliason made comments this evening about the fact that teachers aren't trained, don't feel trained, or able to teach PE. And I can appreciate the fact that if you haven't taught PE for a while, you could well benefit from some professional developments around that. But the reality is that if you hold a multiple subject credential, that credential says that you can teach PE, art, science, and in the case of art and science, the district, the board, is funding a full-time, if you call, I guess the word specialty teacher, to provide service in those areas. And I would just have to say to the board, and I just say this from experience, that there aren't a lot of elementary schools that can afford to have a full-time science teacher, a full-time art teacher, and even a credentialed librarian. That's not a given in all elementary schools. So, but in our district, because we really believe it's important for our students, the students we serve, to really get the best possible instruction, you know, some years ago, and as a basis for the parcel tax partly as well, I'm sure, it was recognized that these are needs that our students have, and we need to find ways to fund those things. But in terms of where we are today, and that's not to say maybe when you go through the budget in the fall, as I'm recommending, and the board is aware of where every dollar is spent, that you could not at that point give staff direction to look at making some adjustments, which probably, since it involves personnel, will probably be for the 15-16 school year, not because you can't release staff or in the middle of the year. But at least the board have the opportunity to weigh those options. So what we're saying with PE is that for next year, it's really a scheduling issue, and it is an issue of regular staff having to be involved in PE instruction with students. There are, I have to say, there are many elementary schools in which kids don't meet the 200 minutes per every 10 days, and that's not to say that's okay, and it's not an excuse. It's kind of the reality of where schools have been, but many schools have been. But in the schools that do meet that requirement, they have a full-time PE teacher, but they do not have an art teacher, they may not have a science teacher, and they may not have a credentialed librarian. They may have an instructional assistant in libraries. So those are kind of some of the trade-offs that schools have had to make in order to fund that. So my comments about the PE, and maybe Dr. Rubio may have some other comments, but I think we take seriously our obligation to ensure that we meet the ed code requirements for the minutes. But until we can identify the dollars that would fund, if, for example, a full-time PE teacher or something at some point would really help us address that, the board needs some time and staff needs time to look at the budget and look at alternative ways in which that can be supported. So with that said, then the last two items on the second page are in green, because these are things that we can do with base grant funding. The translation services is an ongoing cost in the current year. We have been utilizing a staff person at NEH to assist with translation services as they have been needed. We will continue to fund that in the base grant for next year. And then again, the idea of an AP class, it says online, but AP class, whether it's online or in direct instruction, and or elective classes that meet G requirements, whether they're science electives or other academic electives. But if they're science, in the science area, they can be covered with funding, with the funding the board authorized for the full-time science teacher. So in summary, the staff feels that all the green and blue items on page 1 can be staffed, can be funded. We actually did include the blue items that have a rating of 1.6. We've actually included those in the LCAP draft you have on your desk that we gave you this evening. But it's at the board's pleasure whether you want to fund those or find other ways to use those funds. We just felt we needed to go down the board's ranking and try to find ways to fund those items that were ranked the highest by the board. And so those items are in your latest draft of the LCAP. And we feel that the LCAP, it may not be 100% exactly perfect, but we think essentially it's in the form ready to submit to the county for the county's approval. And of course, the board knows that the plan can always be revised and amended. That's part of the process. So with that, I'm going to open it up to board questions or comments.
Just some additional information for the board. The teachers were kind enough to give me their personal emails for summer contact, so this document did go out to all the teachers except one who we haven't been able to reach since the closing of school. We did get some feedback that we were able to use along with your feedback in the revisions, and I was able to respond in writing to the questions, and that was the reason we had some teachers here tonight, because they were the same teachers who actually asked questions and I responded to. So just wanted to let you know that element, although it was a short window for us, with the personal emails of teachers, I think it was helpful to get that information out.
Are there highlights of the comments that you can?
Dr. S., you might highlight the comments from the particular ELD teacher from Ms. Miller, because you dealt with them more than I did. The other comments were just more generic questions about the PE position and clarification of whether it was funded or not.
I did receive about 5 questions from Mr. Gibb around his interest in better understanding the ed specialist position and the role that they would play in being able to service students who are not meeting standard. So I responded to those questions. I think I copied the board on my responses. I also contacted Kim Miller in response to Member Affelt's question about the role of the ELD teacher, not just to provide direct instruction to the students who are eligible for the program, but to provide support, PD, coaching for regular classroom teachers around SEDI strategies. I talked to her this morning. She indicated that actually that was her plan at Annie Yates for this coming year, is to be able to provide that support to the regular classroom teachers. And when I asked her about, based on her knowledge of the number of students currently identified at ESS that are English learners, that it would not be, that it would be reasonable to expect that a 40% EL teacher would be able to also provide that support when he or she was not working directly with identified EL students. So as a result of that, we added into that item, we added not just the direct service to students, but also to provide SEDI support and PD for the regular classroom staff.
Great, thank you for following up on that particular point.
Any
So,
other questions or comments about what the priority or the list provided in the comments from Dr. Tsukiyama from board members?
We will certainly entertain the public but I've got a few comments first. First of all, I think I've come around on the ed specialist access to general ed students as a appropriate and a good use of our supplemental concentration dollars as a way to increase and improve our intervention services for our high need students. So I understand that and support that being in there. I know I had questions about that last Friday. A related fiscal question on that item is, if I'm understanding that correctly, we are using now general fund dollars to underwrite 20% of 4 special ed specialist teachers. Does that thereby free up special ed dollars that we had this year to do something else with, or dollars in some other way?
So that's a good question. I can tell you that in this year that just ended, 3.6 FTE of the 4.0 FTE at Annie Yates for the special education teachers, 3.6 FTE was funded through special ed funding. The other 40% was funded through Title I. And so part of the reason, again, that this item surfaced as a need was that we understood that the site council had proposed some other uses for the Title I funds. So I think staff here just assumed that those dollars may not be available to continue that, which is what led to this recommendation. So technically, there would be, of the 4 special education teachers, 80% of the cost for the 4 teachers, excuse me,
Basically a point.
40% more of the costs would no longer be borne by special ed funding. However, the issue is that special ed already encroaches on the general fund. So my assumption, unless I'm missing something, Mr. Bonet, maybe you can help me with this, is that those dollars would simply reduce the encroachment on the general fund by about, I would estimate, $40,000.
Mr. Bonet shaking his head, yeah. So, yeah. And I guess the other way to think about it is the Title I piece is being freed up to by a parent liaison. Yeah, or other piece. So, okay. I'm really pleased to see that parcel tax dollars are being used for the 30,000 one-time math curriculum alignment. That would, the new Common Core adoption. That was my other concern about money I really thought should come out of our kind of core operating funds and parcel tax if the state can't fund it. So I appreciate that effort. On the full-time technology teacher, similar question to the special ed one. My understanding, we this year have had an instructional aide supporting in the computer lab. So are we maintaining that position and adding a full-time technology teacher, or are we upgrading that position, as it were, and transforming it into the existing staff and making that person? In which case, are we just reducing our deficit with the aide's salary, or are we using that money, or could we use that money, for example, to support some of the other things that existing staff is currently doing that they won't be able to do full-time?
Right. Good question. So the staff's recommendation is that we eliminate that instructional aid for technology position, and in its place look at the credentials of the existing staff and identify an existing staff person to fulfill the full-time technology teacher role. We have not proposed then the use of the IA technology dollars for any other purpose. And again, it's similar to the issue with PE. Staff is taking, at least our recommendation is, wherever we can begin to work away at the ongoing deficit, we ought to do that. Now, having said that, the board certainly has it within its prerogative to say, okay, so we're not going to pay for a technology aid for next year, so there's arguably, let's just pick a number, $40,000 available to fund another priority, and that's the board's prerogative. But at some point, the board is going to have to address with Dr. Rubio and the district staff is going to have to address how you're going to work the deficit spending down so you don't continue to use the reserves you have to backfill the deficit spending, because you will get to a point where you won't have the reserve to do that, and then you have to make the cuts all in one year. My kind of way of thinking about this, and it's kind of like what we did when I was here 3 years ago, and the state kind of, reduced. I mean, we cut $2.2 million over a 3-year period, but well, the goal was not to try to eliminate the deficit all in one swoop, because it has a devastating impact on program. The system can't adjust to that, you know. So it's like, if you know, let's say the structural ongoing deficit is 700,000, you don't do anything to increase that, but over a 3-year period, you have a goal to reduce that deficit by, say, a third. And the system can better adjust and accommodate to that. And in addition, you have the reality, hopefully, well, I said real, that base grant funding would increase, or other sources of funding will come into play that will, by and of itself, reduce some of the deficit spending without, and so that would mean, let's just say hypothetically, you received in 15, 16, $100,000 more in base grant funding. Rather than say, oh boy, we have new money, let's buy this, 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 you can also say, well, you know what, that's great, we're not going to spend that, and what we're going to do is we're going to use that to cover 100,000 of ongoing deficit spending. So what I'm saying to you is that's why staff doesn't feel that we would be exercising fiduciary responsibility, recommending to you that you spend the $40,000 that won't be spent on the technology aid, but we also recognize it's the board's role to make that kind of policy decision, or that kind of budget decision. So,
Got it. At a minimum, I guess the thought comes to my mind that that individual, whoever is the existing staff to become the full-time technology, has an existing job, and that, you know, there may be coverage needs there unless we're sacrificing, you know, whatever that person was doing for part of our program. So I guess we don't need to decide that tonight till we kind of, you know, I mean, I think I'm putting a bookmark in, I guess, to, yeah, till we see how who that person is, what their duties are.
And because
what the
that's a
coverage is,
personnel
and what the
item,
budget
it probably
looks
is more
like.
appropriate not to discuss that in open session.
Yeah.
But that certainly, the board doesn't have to approve that this evening, because it doesn't involve, it really doesn't involve the expenditure of supplemental and concentration grant money. So the board could look at that in July.
Yeah, we don't need to approve the personnel action. But I'm talking about, do we need to decide what to do with that $40,000 aid money? And that's what I want to put a bookmark on.
You do
so
not,
we see
you do not
discussion.
have to do that, because it will ultimately, until the board makes a decision whether to spend that money or not, it will fall out in the end, it will fall out in the ending balance.
And I would just share with you that, and this, of course, is, you'll see more of this in Mr. Bonet's presentation, but the deficit spending is much larger than I realized in the last, within the last 24 hours. And so it would be irresponsible for me as your new superintendent not to recommend, because Dr. Sugiyama's example of around 700,000 wasn't a number he just picked out of the air, actually. So it's as an ongoing number. So it's I'm kind of concerned about it, that if we do not chip away at that deficit spending, we're heading down a path of potential problems for us that are more serious.
Let me just, and this will come back when we get to the next item on general fund budget, but so you recall from our budget study session, I think it was at our last regular meeting, Mr. Bonet indicated that on the revenue side of the ledger, he did include the additional supplemental and concentration grant funding, and as well as the increase in the base grant funding. That was about 85,000 base grant, 338,000 for supplemental and concentration grants, of which 97,000 was already spoken for by the ongoing costs to help support the EL program. So that's why we got to 241,000. But you recall that the question was asked, well, so the expenditure side, and his response was, we did not build in on the expenditure side the cost for supplemental and concentration grant expenditures, because the board had not made that decision yet. So one of the reasons why the deficit spending that you'll see on a subsequent PowerPoint slide that Mr. Bonet included is because the business office has built into the expenditure side for this evening's budget adoption the cost of adding the full-time science teacher at about an estimated 103,000. So what you're going to see is that if you looked at what you saw at the study session on June 11th versus what you'll see tonight, and if you looked at the deficit, the deficiency and excess of revenues, it's going to increase by about $100,000, and that's as a result of the science teacher being added into the budget.
Okay. It's helpful. Helpful preview. The bilingual parent liaison is, I guess, when do you see, I mean, it's in the LCAP, so as it stands tonight, we approve this LCAP. It seems as if we're authorizing the hiring of a bilingual parent liaison, which I would support, and the allocation of Title I to that effect. But it sounded like that you've got that in yellow because it's a proposed, or some, so I want to understand if you're saying we should get the final, thumbs up from the SSC, we should wait till fall to decide this. I guess that's my question, because I guess I would, if we're going to do it, I would be in favor of getting the person hired and here before school starts so that, they hit the ground running when there's a lot of energy and new parents coming in, and we not, end up hiring this person in November.
Yeah, so good question. So, and I'll let Dr. Rubio and Miranda Carita chime in on this if I misspeak here, but one of the areas that we have been struggling with, I know Member Affelt has some thoughts on this, but it's the issue of the interrelationship between site plans and the LCAP. So I spent a fair amount of time this morning talking to, I actually was very pleasantly surprised that the two people who are head of their respective divisions, the directors of their divisions, one division responsible for site plans and the other responsible for LCAP, that I was able to actually get a hold of both of them. And the question I posed to them really was trying to understand the statute language that relates to the LCAP must consider, this is not the exact words, but must essentially consider the site plan goals and actions. So the response I got from the State Department staff was, I thought, somewhat interesting, because their interpretation of the language is, this is my read of what they were saying, is that one doesn't drive the other. In the ideal world, they get developed kind of in a way that Mr. Gibb talked about, kind of in a collaborative way. So as the district LCAP is developed, it does, by its very nature, consider site needs. To which my response to the State Department person was, well, in the ideal world, in a small district, that's probably more possible logistically than a large district with 40 schools or 50 schools or 100 schools. But both of the State Department directors for their respective departments admitted the fact that this year in the transition year, it's been a little more complicated to affect that process. And it kind of goes back to what I shared with you about what happened in my previous district, and that is, in the previous district, as the board approved site plans on an annual basis, the difference here is that if the site plans are approved in October and the LCAP has to be approved by June 30th, then as the LCAP's being developed, we work with the sites, get their sense, and when the board adopts the LCAP, the sites can then finish their site plans, and you can assure that there is this alignment, if you will, between the site plan and the LCAP. It was difficult to manage that in this first year of transition. One State Department director for site plans, for the SIPSA plans, indicated that he felt that down the road, this is just an opinion, but his thought was that at some point the LCAP will drive what the site plans will come up with. I don't know that I agree with him 100% because I don't think you can develop a district LCAP without considering what the needs of the sites are. I mean, you know, it's not like the district says, we're going to do A, B, C, and school sites, you have to agree, because every school site's different. They have unique needs. And we only have 2 schools, but you can imagine a district that has 10 schools serving a wide geographical area. Each school is going to identify a different set of needs. And so I think the intent, as I think Board Member Affeld has continued to remind us, is the intent is to ensure that site needs are considered in the development of the LCAP. And the best way to do that is trying to develop a process that kind of runs together in a collaborative way, so that at the end of the day, when the board is presented with the LCAP, we can say, and the school sites, we're looking at their needs in conjunction with our developing LCAP goals and actions. And that's in the ideal world how it should happen. But it was a little difficult to manage that this year because of the nature of the transition.
Well, you've nailed it. That's exactly how it's, I think it should happen and how it's supposed to happen. And I'll acknowledge I had a hand in getting the language into the statute that says what it does, and getting it into the LCAP that says what it does. Pretty correctly.
Well, but at the same time, it's also, the complicating factor is that oftentimes the site has access to funds that the district does not, and vice versa. So let me give an example. School sites might have fundraisers through the PTO where they can raise funds that they can use to meet certain site identified needs. District has nothing to say about that. On the flip side, an example would be if you want a coordinated system of curriculum adoptions, you can't allow the sites to just decide what it is they want to adopt in a given year, because you don't have enough money to really be able to do a food court type of approach to curriculum adoption. So in that case, you want the district to be able to have, I hate to use the word control, but essentially that the district then takes the resources, the dollars available for curriculum adoption, and have a organized process for how all the sites, in the examples mathematics, you know, for next year. Or writing, I guess writing and mathematics are the 2 areas. So, you know, but even though sites may have their own sources of money, the district may have a need to utilize certain pots of money for district-wide purposes, that still doesn't negate the fact that the district plan ought to, as best as possible, align to what the site needs are.
Right.
Because that is the responsibility of the district, is to help support the school sites in achieving their goals.
Right. So the way I see it is that really the site councils have jurisdiction, as it were, over Title I funds, because most of the other state money is that used to be decided by site councils have been folded into LCFF, you know, general dollars. So the Title I is still, you know, they don't have final say, but that's what site councils are being animated, remains the ability to do. Beyond that, kind of like this is, you really have to listen to us on this one, board. I think that their role is to then advise, you know, how those Title I funds fit and leverage into the broader LCAP dollar conversation. And at the end of the day, it is up to the board. We can say we don't agree with how you think they align, and we don't even agree with how you want to use Title I. We're going to do it differently. Right. But the site council is a mechanism to have a site level conversation. That's how I see it. And we ought to use that and support it as one of the key stakeholders, not the only, because we want to talk to the teacher, we want to talk to parents who aren't on the site council, we want to talk to students. But it is a key mechanism that we ought to use. And since they do have this sort of mandate to decide the best use of Title I dollars within a comprehensive site plan, because that's what they're charged with. The single plan for student achievement is supposed to be a comprehensive educational program for that site, and how do the federal dollars support that? It's the same question, they're just, it's now part of the LCAP conversation.
Right, and I just wanted to add that my experience, and I think this is common for school districts, and maybe Dr. Sugiyama knows as well from his experience, but that school districts will usually, and this was my experience in San Francisco, will tell the school sites, look, you have these ongoing positions that you have either historically or not, or you're going to need to fund out of Title I, and here is the amount of the allocation you have as a site, and that can differ from year to year. So I just want to, you know, be clear that I don't know if it's, as we look at the budgets, I don't know if it's 40,000 for next year. It could be more if we do well in our free and reduced lunch applications, which is something I'm going to be looking at. It could be less if we realize that there is somewhere else where the Title I needs to support existing staff and already is. So I just want to be clear, because one thing that concerns me, and I know it's not where it should be or needs to be, that, and I think Dr. Sugiyama mentioned this in one of the emails to you from me, that typically a school site is informed by the school district, here's an amount of money that is currently available for you to discuss, collaborate on, and come back with us to the school district with a plan. And it may not always be the same amount of money. And what we currently have was not developed necessarily under the parameters of only $40,000 in the current year's example, but that money that amount can change, just so.
But I think, you know, I think we do want to include the site council in the broader conversation, even though we, yeah.
I mean, now that we're talking about this, especially with school site councils, I mean, we've heard a lot from NEAs, but we haven't heard anything from ESS. And I guess my question to staff is, why is that?
Or directly, you mean?
Yeah, we haven't heard anything.
Yeah, so,
that's from.
so ESS, as you know, just recently had a WASC revisit. I
Okay.
think we
Right.
indicated the board that the
You're right.
recommendation was to basically, I guess, sustain a 6-year term of accreditation.
Mhm.
So essentially, the secondary schools accredit for another 3 years before they have to go through full self-study. The WASC committees generally make a lot of very specific recommendations
Mhm.
based on the comparison of the schools' programs against the WASC criteria, which, by the way, are developed jointly with the Department of Education. So it's really considered a joint process. So they are in the process of thinking about their site goals for next year in terms of implementing or putting the WASC recommendations into their action plan. So, of course, if Dr. Rubio and the staff are deciding that the site plans come to the board for review and approval in October, you know, you'll see both plans at that point, but and then it will give ESS the opportunity within the context of the LCAP that you adopt to look at what components of the LCAP flow into their site plan to support site goals.
So another question. So does both sites divide or split the Title I funds, or does each school have their, excuse me, have their own amount that they separately receive?
Do you want to say what that?
Yeah. Yeah. So for the most part, when you apply for cars, you look at how many free and reduced lunch, students who qualify for that. So it varies each year. So sometimes it's based on the percentage.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be that if NEAs has more students, then more Title I will go there, less will go to ESS. In the past, we've also, and that's been based off of the superintendents who state that we've had superintendents who state switch it back from
Right.
school
I
to school.
remember that. I do
So
remember that.
that's one idea.
Right.
There was also a time where ESS wasn't a Title I school at all, so it wasn't even considered, and all the Title I funds went to NEAs.
Okay.
So it's really based on each superintendent. So with Dr. Rubio, it would be based on once he knows how much money we receive in Title I in totality.
Right.
What did the school site councils vote for? So like for instance, ESS is continuing to fund parts of the RSP teachers, which are the special ed teachers, so they can continue the Learning Center, and general ed students can go to the Learning Center
Gotcha.
to, for education specialists. So it varies
Gotcha.
based on the superintendent.
Okay, thank you.
So what about my question as to this bilingual parent liaison? Is that?
happens with that?
Yeah, are we recommending that person be
So
approved and
yeah,
hired
I-
next week?
I think I was starting to tell a story about, and the point of what I was recounting with the department, discussion with the department ed staff is the staff is comfortable with the board making the decision to fund the bilingual parent liaison out of the NEH Title I funds. What we're trying to establish with State Department is whether the board has that authority to do that. And in other words, it's the balancing between the site council's interest and the board's interest, right? And I agree with Member Affel. Ultimately, the board has the final decision, because one thing the State Department kind of basically made clear is the board's not obligated to fund everything the site councils want. You know, there's got to be a consideration of, and there's got to be every effort to align the site goals with the district LCAP. But within that context, if the board were to decide this evening that, no, we think the bilingual parent liaison is an important position, and we're going to approve that so that it's part of the LCAP plan submission, we would want to make sure that the site council is, I'm not sure I want to say comfortable with it, but that they would concur that that would be an appropriate use of the Title I monies.
Did you hear from Mr. Gibb on that at all? I know you talked about the ed specialist stuff.
Well, it is on, no, he did not ask me a question about that, but it is on their current draft of their site plan.
Yeah, I saw it. I emailed him as
And
well.
I don't want to speak out of turn, but
Yeah, I
so I don't
emailed
want
him
but
just to let board members know.
What was the question? I missed the question. I'm sorry, what was the question?
If we heard from Mr. Gibb or the site council generally about whether they were comfortable with our using the Title I money for bilingual parent liaison, which was one of their priorities, but they had other ones.
There was actually, although Mr. Gibb was on the email that was sent to me about the PE position, I didn't receive any other communications from Mr. Gibb. And I feel awkward speaking about this without him being in the room because I don't want to get it wrong, but my recollection from my conversation with him last week was that I don't know how to say this, and I want to get it correct. He certainly was interested in seeing, he had some different options that included different alternatives, and I think his interest in, that he communicated to me, if I can frame this correctly, was that he certainly was hopeful that some of those would be addressed. So, and I did not hear anything else from Mr. Gibb. I would also ask the board to consider, you know, the decision at the site to pull that money out from, because I think the 40,000 was supporting staff, and to move that money quickly towards another position, although I understand the need for the position, before I can get, I guess I'm asking or suggesting that it would be helpful to me to get, have another week with Mr. Bonet and his staff to make sure I understand much more depth of the budget, where the other Title I money that we have is sitting, and because it is funding other staff right now, and I think that's at ESS, and to assess the impact of not having that money fund any staff. And again, this is related to my concerns about the budget deficit, because there's an impact if a school site
Somewhere
says,
else, yeah.
we're just going to take that money away from staff, and we'd like to use it for something else, and it certainly is in the purview of the conversation, although that's typically done with a principal, and I know there's reasons that didn't happen. But I'm concerned about, and I certainly don't want to make any false impressions or commitments to you and the board about that money, and I would feel much more comfortable having a better feel for the entire budget before I did so, and feel better once we have a principal on board and we have those interviews this Friday. So I understand the pressing nature and importance of looking for candidates for a position, and an important position for us in the district. At the same time, I'm trying to weigh that, and I'm asking you to consider the way that as a board, with my still not having the degree of familiarity that I need to have with the budget. I guess it's just an awkward situation for me, and I would like to say, sure, let's just go ahead and move forward. But I also know that that budget deficit is over $700,000, and that's ongoing now. So it may seem like a small amount of money for this position, but now I am now in a position where I'm looking at every position, small or large, and having to kind of have some pause.
Yeah. So, well, I guess where I'm at with it is, we're using the sort of the amount of the Title I money that was previously funding the ed specialists, we're now using supplemental concentration money to do that, and that, and that I am, you know, and this bilingual parent liaison is in the budget. I mean, it's in the LCAP, so that I'm comfortable going ahead and approving it as is. Subject, of course, to, as part of the ongoing, you know, the conversation we're going to have in the fall of how the money shakes down in the budget, and, you know, that's a bad idea. We have too big a deficit. Now we can cover. I mean, so I'm saying the default, yes, we go ahead with it. It's in the LCAP that we approve. The assumption is we're going to do it unless you come back and tell us that it's a really, you know, undoable thing.
So is this yellow item in the LCAP? Is that what you said?
Yes, it is in Section 2 and it is in Section 3B.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I
these
think,
are, like you
so
said,
there
these
are
are
actually two ways you can do
suggested
this. I mean, the board could adopt the LCAP, direct staff to take that item out, because it doesn't affect the requirement to spend all of the supplemental concentration grant, because you're going to spend that. But, and then upon Dr. Rubio's work with the business staff, you can always
Amend.
add that in, or you can approve it with it in, subject to, but that we not actually go out and attempt to fill it until Dr. Rubio in the business office can come back with the board with a more specific analysis of the impact of that on the budget. So, I mean, for me, I can easily just delete it from the LCAP before we submit it, or we can leave it in there. But I'm hearing that the board is comfortable, the member AFL's comfortable with our not moving forward to fill the position until such time that Dr. Rubio in the business office has an opportunity to look at that.
Yeah, and I guess the other two concerns are, there's some things to be worked out. Is this a position that supports the district or only Anna Yates? And right now, it's my understanding that Title I money could be going down for the upcoming year because we had a lot less students maybe participating in the lunch program. So I will go with the will of the board, but I have some hesitation about it right now.
So just before we go on this one, we do have a number of public comment folks who, it's 11 o'clock, so I just wanted to get to them if the board is okay with that, because we could probably go until midnight.
I was thinking the same thing.
Or 2. So I know, I want you, because she already told me earlier in the bathroom. So if you could please come up and provide public comment.
Oh, you're gonna move that. I'm Mrs. Cosby, and I'm grateful to be able to stand up here before y'all to say what I have to say. I'm really pleased to see this on here, the supplement for the reading material and the intervention for the language and the students with special needs. I just want to speak to let you all know exactly why I think it's really important to have the material for the students with special needs. The school term that just went past, some of the students, well, you know everything's been renamed, but the students that was in resource specialists, they was fine with the social studies and different things like that, and they did have some material for them. But the students that came out of SDC classes, which are harder for them to understand, to have comprehension and everything, it was very hard for them. And I'm speaking personal now. As for my grandson, when he came home with homework and coming from social studies, especially when they went into the Roman Empire and Islam and all these other good things like that, it was very hard. And so I tried, because I always tried to do something, so when I speak on, I know what I'm speaking on. So it was like 4, 5 hours. I'm still working with him, trying to get something done, one and only time. Never did it again. So something really needs to be put in place that's carry more of a summary of whatever it is that's being introduced to them, since everyone is in the general ed now. So some material that just summarize to hit the important facts here and there for that he could get better of a comprehension of it. My grandson, he's reading on grade level, but his comprehension is like, okay, he just went to the 8th. He can read grade level, but comprehension is 2nd, 3rd grade. So do you know how frustrating that can be? Not only to the student, but to whatever parent are working with that student. And he loves school, and I don't want that to cause a problem for him to turn against it, or either myself as well. Think about it. You know, it's frustrating. But we was blessed because the teacher was very understanding. But that was just that situation. Now we're in another grade, gonna go to the next grade and a grade on after that. If something is not put in place, every teacher, and not knocking teachers, but you know human, I want to. Every teacher is not gonna be acceptable to that as far as the making sure that the modifications and different things are in place for them. Because I don't think a parent should have to do all that. Some things a parent doesn't mind doing, but if it gets to be where it's really complicated and overbearing, that's too much to put on anyone to have to do that. And I don't feel that anything should come home as homework that the student themselves cannot do in at least in half an hour. So, and it took us quite a while. And when he come home and something he had to look up definition, we have worked on him using a dictionary, so that's no problem. But the other stuff, and I know from my studying, Common Core has put nothing in place for special ed kids. There's nothing for kids at all. Across the whole country, they left that part out. So if you're going to be adopting and doing the Common Core, something needs to be in place at every grade level. If any students are coming in that normally would have been put into a SDC class, but now they're learning centers, because there's no way that they should have to sit the whole time, even in the classroom, without something more modified for them to do, which will keep them abreast to what the generator is doing. But when it comes home, that's a whole new ball game, and that is really complicated. And if anyone know anything about kids with special needs, you know what I'm speaking on. And so, as much as I really appreciate this, I just needed to speak again to let you all know, please don't take that off, because that material is definitely needed there for. Math is not bad because he uses a calculator for different things, but even some of the math, when you go into the word problems and different things like that, if the teacher haven't exit out, I exit out. But I had that understanding with the teachers that he was going to the last school term that just finished. I don't know what I have to face with the coming up. And I don't want to have to go through all those changes, although he have an excellent IEP. And I'm thankful for that. With the teachers and myself and my daughter and all us working with it, excellent. But there's still times when the IEP is overlooked. So I just want to come before you and tell you how thankful I am for what you have put in here, and let you know how important it is to have to be in there for not just mine, but all the students. And I hope that the learning centers will continue on through high school, because one of the things about it is that with him having, and I have to say this name, with him having a teacher like Mr. Rogers, and he was there always. If anything came up, not just with the kids with special needs, even the general ed kids, anything that came up happened, he would automatically incorporate it into the curriculum, and it was discussed with the entire class about anything, what was appropriate, what was inappropriate, how you should act, how you should respond to your fellow peer student and everything. So everything just worked fine with that. His confidence and everything else is up and high. And I would hate to see him lose all that, because he's put into a classroom where someone is not as sensitive to what might be happening with students with special needs. So I would just like for everyone to just take time, think about that when you're making your final decision as to what you're going to adopt and what you're not going to. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you for hanging in there with us.
Yeah, and before you leave, I know, actually, I seen you coming in, and this, you don't have to, but I have, my question is someone in the audience, can someone give her a ride home? Because I seen she walked here today. Okay, great. Okay.
Thank you. Are there other public comments? Anything? Okay. I just wanted to make sure we take care of that. And we can come back to the board now for any additional, other board members have any comments on what's been presented or in terms of the chart, which was very helpful.
Regret to say I wasn't quite done.
Oh, well, let me come back to you. I just
That's
want
all
to
right.
open, just before we.
I want to thank Ms. Cosby, is it?
Yep.
Yeah, Ms. Cosby, I did want to thank you for your comments and really for sticking it out till 11 o'clock at night to pass those on. But rest assured, those dollars aren't going anywhere, is my prediction. Okay. On the PE issue, yeah, I guess that you know, and let me just say generally, I really appreciate staff taking to heart our comments on Friday, the comments that we made, you know, subsequent to Friday in response, and really trying to go back and look at the budget and try to make as many things on this list work as possible. Because I feel much better about where things are tonight on this list than I did even Friday. So thank you.
And we would say it's not perfect, but
Well, yeah.
we're running up against a timeline to get it. It's due at the county office by June 30th. So,
Yeah, time and with the bigger obstacle is the continued inadequate funding in our public school system to not meet student needs. On the PE teacher, the you know, blue solution, as I sort of read this, of having a current IA with support from teachers is not a new thing. That's my understanding of what we're currently doing and trying to do.
That's correct. It's my understanding is that the schedule from last year was that the instructional aid was supporting PE, and I think, and I'm not sure, but I think that might have been more at the lower grades, if I understand correctly, and that, or it could have been the opposite, I'm not sure which way it went, but that the teachers who didn't have that support, the expectation communicated by the principal was that as a teacher normally would, maybe it was the opposite, maybe I have it wrong, but that you would be doing PE as expected, and you need to schedule that time in and communicate that schedule to me. It's part of their normal duties.
Yeah. So, my sense, at least at the lower grade, is that was not happening with the students that I observed and the classrooms I observed, and what I want to, like, I guess, communicate going forward is this is an ongoing issue, and I think it is first and foremost a management issue of figuring out the scheduling, number one, and communicating expectations, number two. But I also think that there's a professional development issue. If we're going to rely on this solution of having our regular ed third grade teacher or sixth grade teacher be responsible for delivering PE minutes, especially 7th and 8th where it's 200 hours, right?
Right.
200 minutes a week. We need to be doing the professional development that refamiliarizes the teachers with what their obligations, but also like what the good strategies are that they could have, you know, productive PE time.
Absolutely, I would agree with you. In fact, if teachers haven't been teaching PE, and it is a common problem because so many school districts now, particularly, and I don't know if this I don't know if this is the same across the country, but certainly my experience in California is that with so many workday schedules where the teachers has a 6-hour work day, well, a 6-hour day with students, that it is always a struggle to accomplish all those pieces with that limited time or length of the workday. So I know it's a problem up and down, my experience with other school districts, but I would agree with you if teachers have also not been keeping up with doing that and have may not be either familiar with or remembering the basic elements with the California physical education standards, that I think minimally it is incumbent on me to make sure, and my staff to make sure, that we have training to help support them in accomplishing that in the correct way. So it's not just playtime, but that it's structured physical education with the elements of muscular endurance, flexibility, and the other two just aren't coming to mind right now for myself. But yes, I agree with you.
Okay.
Well, I think the important thing also note, and this is going to obviously be a ongoing conversation, but the state PE framework, at least the last version I saw, incorporates like 6 or 7 strands. So it's not, I mean, the definition of physical education in the framework is defined in a much broader way. It includes things like dance as well. So, you know, I think that's something, I agree with the board. I mean, and I'd say, even though I said earlier that technically they're credentialed to be able to teach the subject, if you haven't taught it for a long time, it's like any other subject. You can be a single subject, not to pick on Carol, but you can be a single subject in science, but if you haven't taught it for 10 years, you're probably going to have to get some additional training. Would that be fair, say, Carol? Yeah, so.
So my other 2 comments are on sections 3C and 3D, which are new to us. And
Were you going to go over that? Were you going to go over 3? I thought that's what you said.
Yes, I think
wanna
that
go over
because
that
you've not
separately?
seen 3C or 3D previously,
Okay.
because, yes.
we'll circle back
So
to
it'd be,
those.
it'd be appropriate to review those.
So do you want me to hold off on waiting till you review those? Or do you want me to give you my...
No, I
My
think
comments on those, yeah.
we're prepared to take input on sections 3C and 3D.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So you modified it, and in response to 3C in particular, you modified, which I think it reads better and is more aligned to the statute. I still have the question about, I guess it's about the second to last sentence. The allocation will increase to approximately $311,000 in 15-16 and $216,000 in 16-17. So I continue. My confusion continues. Is that
Yes. There's the word.
referring to the 241 allocation
Yes.
increases to those amounts, or the 338 allocation?
So
increases?
the sentence needs to be corrected with one word.
Yeah.
And in 3C on page 44, in the initial paragraph, the second to last sentence was, the allocation will increase to, it should be increased by. So does the board have page 44?
No, so I was going to tell you that
Issue 3C,
the print off that you gave the board,
No,
Dr.
this is
Sugiyama,
what I
the
gave you.
The print off that you gave the board, it has the same issue of the print off I experienced and emailed you about, that whatever in this version, it doesn't print out properly. We only have 29 pages, and goals 2 and 3 of section 2 are all gone. It kind of ends at 11. It pulls up fine on the emails.
Oh, yeah.
But the document's 48, it's 46 pages. Okay, I apologize. I thought we had this whole issue resolved, because I printed out my own copy this afternoon, and
You're-
I
you-
printed
you're-
out 46 pages.
Your printer is the only one in the universe that works on this, because this looks exactly like what I printed out, and it cut it off in the same spot.
Yeah, I shredded mine. Great job.
So I don't know if you have it on email that you could send it to. But I think this section doesn't change.
I don't
It's
think
on
it changes.
Page 27 of what we're looking at.
And your basic question is, does that 311,000 mean it's an increase from the 244, or is it new money? Are you asking that question?
Or is it
It's,
the total amount?
Or is it,
yeah, so I think the confusion is the allocation will increase, and what is which allocation? So
well, the
is that
allocation
adding-
will be approximately, I think it actually should be, will.
But I don't, then it's a decrease, because we're at 338 now.
Mhm.
So
It-
we're
well,
going to get more money in the future.
Well,
so it's-
well, and Mr. Bonet probably could address this better than I can, but I know that he plugged the numbers into the FICMAT calculator, and this is based currently on those projections, and all this, and these numbers are slightly moving targets for us, and so you would imagine that based on the projections and the theory of LCFF that the money continues to increase, because we have similar questions ourselves. Do you want to chime in on this one?
Let me just
Yeah.
interrupt there. I know we're increasing, that the FICMAT projections are based on Department of Finance's projections, and so we will get what we're getting this year, and
Right.
we will get more in 15-16, and we will get more in 16-17.
Money, right.
So I know we're not going backwards, at least during that time frame under current projections. The math question to me is, so where it says 311, does that mean
excuse
plus
me.
97, so that it's really 408? Because
No.
we need to, or is it saying 311 on top of the 338, and it's really 649?
It's the incremental increase.
Yeah.
I think
I think we had this conversation today, but I believe it's actually an additional 331,000 on top of the 338.
I think that's 311.
311. That's
Yeah,
right.
I think that's
Well,
right. So
but I
it's
think,
649.
so, and
And now it's your
It's the incremental increase.
Mr. Bonet, I think
Is that
that
what you're saying?
when you ran the calculator and came up with 331, I probably didn't make the correction on the first part of 3C because I have 311. So I guess, aren't those two numbers supposed to be the same?
They should be about the same. What I've told the board in the past is don't get married to the numbers because they're going to change. Now, things have changed, and they'll change again because what was recently adopted was more than what the governor proposed in May. So this is going to be a moving target until we come back after the school services workshop with more definitive numbers and that are input into the calculator.
Yeah, I understand, but you should be able to tell us what the mathematical answer is based on the numbers we currently have in front of us.
So there'll be 200 and around 41 to 67,000 additional 14, 15,
For this year.
and an additional 300 plus thousand in 15, 16.
On the increase,
That's an increase.
on top of
On
the
top-
241?
Yes,
So 241 and then 311 or so.
yes. So it'll be
Yeah.
in excess of $500,000.
Okay.
And then there's an additional 200 plus $1,000 in 16, 17.
On top of the
On top of it
311,
all,
which was on
yes.
top of the, yeah, which is all on top of the 97 prior year expenditures.
That's all dependent on our ADA being at projection
Where we are.
and
And our
at the,
unduplicate account.
and
Premium.
and the state funding to those levels.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, these are projections. So I think your buy, I guess, is correct instead of two. So the total allocation will increase, I would add total,
Well, we can rephrase it to make that, I can,
Yeah.
it'd be clearer to say that the total allocation will increase by this amount in 15-16, and the total allocation will increase by this amount in 16-17. That'd probably be
But
clearer.
even then, it's an additional
You know,
amount, because it's not clear that the 216 is on top of the 311 in
Right.
15-16, you know. So,
But if
Annie,
you-
you can work on the language, but I
Yeah.
think you know what we want to communicate.
And what you described is my current understanding as well, and I would be greatly disappointed if I'm incorrect, but you will certainly, the board will be the first to know if I find out that we have this wrong.
If we're going
But you know what,
down.
actually, this reads correct because it says the allocation will increase. So that's the yearly allocation, which it will increase by the 307,000. Now, to make it a little bit more reader-friendly, you could have put the allocation of concentration and supplemental dollars will increase by approximately these amounts. You know, but the way it reads, it's an incremental increase. That's the way I read this. The allocation will increase to approximately that amount. So, I mean, it's basic interpretation. I can see what Member Atfield is saying, but it does read pretty much correctly.
Well, just for transparency's sake, as you know, what we're trying to communicate to our community is, you know, I think the most important number and the one required in the statute is for this year 338, which is
14, 15.
right. What's our base, or what's our prior year? What did we spend on unduplicateds, and what's the additional that we're spending this year? That total, those together, is 338, and then the next most transparent number to me is, and in 15-16, this is projected to increase to 649.
No,
From 340.
If you're going to say that,
38 to
if you're going to say
649.
that, you ought to say the total increase will be that.
Which could be said, that's another, we could,
Right.
we could
And
say it
that's
that
the
way as well.
difference. And that's the difference.
Semantics, folks.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
But it's,
Yeah,
but
it-
that's a big difference.
Well, it
to say
probably
we're
is
gonna
better to
get
frame in terms of
300,000
what
next
the
year or
actual amount will
650
be.
next year.
Right, that's what
Is
you
the-
want
the-
to,
is the
right.
big
The total allocated amount.
Rewriting
and
sounds
such
good.
In years.
No,
will
I
be
think
this
that's a
much.
good cleanup. That's a good proposal, clean up the language.
And my math question on 3D is that, you know, whether that's looking at 14, 15, 267 this year or 241, whatever the, you know, number,
Yes.
we should put the same number in there.
Right,
Okay,
so
just to be
the
consistent.
267 is the most recent calculation that came out of the FICMAC calculator.
And you know why that is? Because they added a little more money, right,
Right.
in the last budget.
Well, we're not sure that that's the case. It's
Really?
just that I think that to be conservative, the original number was based upon a blending of the school services calculator and the FICMAC calculator, so you kind of got a number in between. The county feels, as many people, that the school services calculator is too conservative. So for the purpose of this, we decided to use the FICMAC calculator. Is that right, Mr. Benet? And that explains why it's higher than the 241. Now, but that is still an estimate. So until they come back in the school services workshop and are told exactly how to calculate it, right now it's a placeholder in Section D.
Well, I guess for our internal consistency and communication, like, this should be the
Yeah.
same 241.
Yeah, and I understand your point. That's not a dilemma for us, is it? If we manually make
is that
that
right?
number align to what we've been talking about in our other documents, I would assume it's not a problem for us?
Why couldn't you put estimate?
Okay, well, I would agree in terms of consistency and transparency in our communication. I think we should make it the same number for now.
But they'll just create more questions.
Yeah, so we can go ahead and make that change.
Well, but the only problem is you're using a different formula to calculate one cell over the 3 years, and you're using another calculator to generate the other numbers. So that presents a little bit of,
Throws me off then.
I mean, I understand in terms of the public's perception, but we're kind of mixing a little bit apples and, well, maybe the better analogy is we're mixing tangerines and tangelos, I think.
Well, why don't you just use the
Hybrids
word
and hybrids.
estimate? If we're not completely sure what the number is going to be, just put estimate.
Okay, we could put EST
Right.
241,
That's what you
and
have
because
to
these
do.
numbers are going to change anyway.
Right, especially if they're going to change.
know that's certain.
Well, the, 5%. Yeah, I mean, if it's 241, I get 4.5% instead of,
5.
I think for purposes of approving this document, we approve the way it is, and then we'll come back once Mr. Bonet come back from school service, from the Sacramento, and then we could update, you know, the numbers to be accurate.
You'll have solid numbers.
That's what I'm saying, right. And then we can just, if you want to amend this and add those numbers in there, that's what we can do. But I think for the purpose of tonight, let's approve this and let's move on. That's a motion.
I don't have a mic, but, all right.
Second.
So as I come in, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any objections to moving forward?
oh, here's my, yeah, here's my math problem, sorry guys, with 3D, is that number is supposed to be 338 over the estimated base grant of 5.3 million. Not the 241 or the 267, whatever that is. It's supposed to be the
Okay, that makes sense.
this year's increase and improve plus the base
I
grant.
don't think it changes the motion.
So I guess the
And
question,
so
Mr.
the
Bonet, wasn't the
percentage-
97,000 though
The percentage is 6.3.
folded into the base grant?
Yeah, it was.
The 97 is folded into the base grant, and the following year, the 267 is folded into the base grant. You need to remember that part of the difference, there's 18,271 in transportation funding that also needs to come out. It's
Yeah, I think the transportation, you're right, that comes out of the base grant, right?
that formula that you have there in
Yeah.
front of you is straight out of the FICMAT worksheet.
Well-
There was no manipulation by staff with regard to those numbers. They came straight from the FICMAT
And does the FICMAT worksheet say
For
this
the
is the
MPP.
this is the 3D number? Or it's,
Well, they're still all estimates at this
no,
point.
I understand, but was FICMAT worksheet saying this is the number, the percentage that goes into 3D of the LCAP template?
It does not, the FICMAT worksheet does not state that. I did email FICMAT, and their reply was, those are the percentages that you should use for 3C or 3D when calculating your MPP.
Well,
The proportionality,
the proportionality percentage.
right,
Yeah, so they said that's the proportionality percentage.
that's correct.
Okay, well, the proportion, they're wrong, because it's in, you know, the reg, I quote to you, the proportionality percentage is what you spend in your prior year base, it's at 97, plus what's new this year, divided by the LCFF base.
The problem is, we don't
Minus.
have the amount that we spent this year.
No, it's 97. Well, I meant prior year. It's the 97 plus the 241, or 267 if you want to use that number, divided by estimated base grant 5.329. So that comes up with a higher percentage than 5%, and it's like more than 1% more than that. But anyway, that's my piece on that, and you know.
We probably need to continue to kind of, I think, we had a long conversation about this today, actually. And we kind of at the end decided that in spite of getting the written email response from FICMAT, it looked more like kind of, oh, they already had it written up in the frequently asked questions, so I'm not sure they really responded to it. But I think we all agreed that when Mr. Bonet and Dr. Rubio go to the school services workshop, they will likely get clarification on this issue.
So just to, I know we've had a motion and we're going forward, but question. So when we talk about budget adoption, or well, the 45 days, we'll have what's the first?
You will have budget adjustments to approve.
Okay, so would this document be appropriate? Those numbers clarified? Would we have the ability to bring this document at that time?
Absolutely.
Okay, because that, I think that will help. And
We
would
can
that
bring them both at
address-
the same time. We could revise the LCAP plan because it's a 3-year plan that is adjustable, as well as the budget, which we typically make adjustments to throughout the year. Specifically after the 45 days after the budget is adopted, at first interim and at second interim.
So I just, add that as a course of action to bring that forward at that time, so we can have this clarified, and we'll have much more cement on a lot of these things, I would assume. Okay.
Well, could I just add,
Sure.
though, I just want to kind of validate Member Affeld's comment, because we spent an hour and a half on this topic
Yeah.
today.
And y'all know way more than I.
And the topic was, what's in the numerator and what's in the denominator? And based on reading what VicMat said, I think we got it right, but I have to say to you, I'm not sure we're 100% correct. But I think that since this is something that every district's going to have to do,
Everybody doing it.
I believe the school services workshop, school services will provide specific guidance on this.
And make sure you talk to Mr. Bennett when you talk to someone at school service. He's the
We'll go
authority.
right to the top and
Yes,
ask him.
You go to Ron.
Yeah,
And he'll probably refer us to one of his staff people. No, but I think it's an important question, and I think it's important that that is researched after at the school services workshop. And, there is the slight possibility that the calculation didn't have the right numbers on top and bottom, and because we ran the numbers in all different ways, and if you did what Member Affeld said, then the percentage is about a little over 6%.
right. And the purpose of the proportionality percentage is it's not to reflect an increase of spending this year over last year. The increase is what you are providing to unduplicated pupils this year, in the LCAP year, over what you are providing to all pupils. That's the conceptual comparison. And so the numerator is what you are continuing to provide from prior years to unduplicateds, are 97,000, plus your increase, your supplemental concentration, new money this year, over your base. How do you get your base? You subtract that numerator number from your total LCFF allocation, which leaves you your base, and that becomes the denominator. So that's the conceptual approach. If they did it differently, they're not doing it correctly in their formula.
Yeah, but the math problem is, so we get the fact of what the numerator includes, but the fact is the 97,000 is in the base because
Yeah.
it was folded into the base. So
It's not supposed to
that
be.
if you're taking it out of
That's
the
supposed-
base,
it's part
you're
of the numerator.
actually mathematically increasing the percentage.
Yes.
Right.
It's supposed to go into the numerator.
So that's the
And-
question.
And the accurate reflection is we are providing, because those are services we're providing above and beyond the general core program. So it's supposed to be in the numerator.
Right.
And the 6% is a more accurate reflection of the additional effort the district is making for unduplicated kids. But that said, I mean, my general overarching sentiment at this late hour
Oh.
and this late date in the year
You okay with me, Member Affeld?
is that
me.
I really appreciate the work that the staff has done, and that includes Ms. Allen, who's no longer in the room, to try to get this LCAP right, and I appreciate the indulgence of my fellow
We'll
board
get
members.
you later. It's okay.
Yeah.
We'll
Oh,
get you
yeah.
later.
You've already got me in many ways. Yeah. There was that Christmas vacation. that
Oh,
didn't
yeah, it's
happen.
over. It's over. Oh, that's right.
But you're right. This is not perfect. I mean, there's still, we haven't captured all of our expenditures, which, we haven't captured every single sub-element of the state priority. We've captured a ton, more than most districts. I think we've done, and I've looked at a lot of LCAPs. So, so I'm going to vote to approve. I'm going to vote to approve the LCAP, knowing that I'm not approving it as a model or perfect LCAP because I can't. However, I'm approving it because we're more than meeting what the county's going to require of us this year, and the most important, pieces here are what are we doing with our additional funds to increase or improve, and I'm aboard. I'm totally on board with how we've come around to figure that out. So,
Great work.
Do we get an A for effort?
A for effort for sure.
oh, A plus for effort.
Then there's a, so we have, and I forgot, I hope you got who.
I didn't get it.
I believe it was member,
I made the motion, and
Christian second. No objections at that time. Are there any now? Moving on. Can we have a vote, please? Roll call, please.
Member Pats?
Yes.
Member Ash?
Yes.
Member Affelt?
Yes.
President Dice?
Yes.
Member Dwin?
aye.
Great. With that, appreciate staff again, and we look forward to the next iteration and updates as they come. We're going to move now on to
I know,
item
I know
5.
staff will work to make sure that next time Member Apfel can say, this is the best plan I've seen.
Absolutely.
That's right.
It
and-
may be the best plan in the
He
state.
will to big
And
It
we're
may
going,
be
and we're
the
going to
best
give
plan
you
in the
this.
state.
I do, though, I think in terms of telling the whole story concept, I think when you go through the whole entire budget, which I'm recommending you do,
Yeah.
and you go through what everything is being spent on, while you go through that, at the same time, you're marking down which state priority that expenditure is lined up to. So when the staff revises the LCAP, at whatever point you revise it, those things could be very easily put into the document. So now, you don't want to do that budget exercise twice. So at the same time where you're understanding where the money's being spent, you also want to say, oh, which state priority is that addressing?
Right.
Which then makes it easier for staff to take that and drop it into the next revision of the LCAP. And you will get to the full story
Yeah.
because you really have looked at the entire budget. So.
That's a good suggestion.
And why would I not belabor the point? It's almost midnight anyway, so sorry to my members to my left. But I did realize, I've seen a lot of school districts actually highlight the priorities of the district in how they set their agenda. I mean, I've seen it, and I know that's something that we can move toward anyway. So we're not trying to trail behind and pick it up and figure it out. So there's a number of ways to get to this. And thank you, Dr. Sugiyama, for all your hard work and leadership in the last